And we are live. Thank you for coming to this session of Vanilla Street Epistemology. My guest today is Mark Angelotti. Mark is a friend of mine from other Discords, but rather than having me describe, Mark, tell us about yourself.
Well, like you said, juggling. I am Mark Angelotti. I live in Indiana in the United States. Although I am originally from nearby where you live. I grew up in Southern California, and I am an old guy. I'm in my mid-50s, and I enjoy discussions about philosophy and whether or not God exists and stuff like that. Although I am a practicing atheist, but I'm also, for about the last 10 years, a vegetarian, or what some people might call a total vegetarian, meaning I don't eat meat, dairy, or eggs. And so that's the reason why I'm here today, for the most part. But I have a lot of interests. I have a lot of different interests in different types of discussions. But probably the most controversial is claims about what we should eat or shouldn't eat.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So leading into your claim, I think I typed it earlier because you told me what it was. Would you like to tell me your claim?
Yeah, I'm going to say that what I would call a whole foods plant-based diet is a healthier diet than the alternatives. And I realize there is some fuzziness to the issue of what is a whole foods plant-based diet.
Yes, I'm going to hit you up for those definitions. So before I ask for clarification, how confident are you that a whole foods plant-based diet is healthier than the alternatives?
Yeah, I'm going to give it.
This is true.
Yeah, I'm going to give it about 90%.
90%. Hopefully I typed that right. Okay. Can you describe to me what whole foods means?
Well, yeah. So the reason why I would it's often used, whole foods is often used, is that the highly processed foods tend to be less healthy than the less processed foods. So even when it comes to whole grains, it's probably healthier to eat brown rice rather than brown rice pasta. It's probably better to have edamame or soybeans than soy milk, stuff like that. So less processing is a little bit healthier than more processing.
Is it because the processing degrades, or because it removes parts that you need to something balance something?
Yeah, it could be a little of both. I mean, there could be situations where the processing actually removes some of the nutrients, and sometimes, in the case of fiber, whole wheat pasta is good, but the fiber doesn't work as well as if you're eating wheat berries, for example. So processing generally degrades the nutritional value, although it's not entirely true, because you want to, certain foods, you want to cook them in order to detoxify them, or even give, so there are cases where steaming vegetables might make them a little bit more bioavailable to you. And
yes. Okay. That wouldn't disqualify them for being whole food. That would just be the minimum processing to make them easy for people.
Exactly.
Okay. And you say, and then plant-based was the next part.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Plant-based, which means, no meat, dairy, or eggs. And so when you say plant-based whole foods diet, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be vegan. In other words, if, as one of my favorite nutritionists have said, if you can make sure that 95% of your calories are from relatively unrefined, relatively unprocessed plant-based foods, then you're doing good. The other 5%, do what you want with that other 5%. Just try to make sure the 95% fits into that category. That's kind of so. In other words, we don't necessarily have to get hung up on the hair splitting of, do I have to be completely vegan? Completely free of? Can I have meat? Can I have a top sirloin steak on my birthday? That kind of stuff. That may not be nutritionally relevant to whether or not you have top sirloin on your birthday or not.
Okay, so from a nutritional perspective, we don't have to be precise if we are the majority or the bulk of it is this way, because it's not a moral argument.
Exactly. We're not making the ethical or environmentalist argument. We're just making a claim about nutrition for human health.
Okay, so you said healthier than the alternatives. What would be the next best?
Well, I would say that quite often you hear in the news media about the Mediterranean diet, which is probably just as fuzzy or fuzzier than the whole food plant-based diet, because you look on the map and you can't find Mediterranean anywhere. Is it Israel? Is it Egypt? Is it Italy? Greece? What is that? Where is that place called Mediterranean? But what
My
is that?
producers from there.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, I mean, there's lots of different diets in the Mediterranean, and they vary over time. What decade are you talking about? What village? And so on. But generally, what the Mediterranean diet is supposed to be is kind of like, more plant-based foods, more fruits and vegetables, etc., that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty healthy.
Okay. So in what way is the Mediterranean diet less healthy? Is it because it's less well defined, therefore omits things that are unhealthy, or is it in what ways how can you tell the difference between this first and the second?
Yeah, and that's difficult because nobody can precisely define either diet, but I would say on generally speaking, a Mediterranean diet is more likely to contain more meat, dairy, and eggs, and more likely to contain things like olive oil, which on the whole food plant-based diet, vegetable oils are considered too highly refined, too highly processed plant-based foods.
So what do you put in your pan when you cook, or you just don't cook it? I mean, what do you do for the oils?
Instead of oil, when I cook, I usually use water or vegetable broth or apple cider vinegar, white vinegar. If I need some moisture in the pan to cook things. Okay,
I see.
But it does make it hard to fry
a lot. So yeah.
It does make it hard to fry things if you're not going to use oil, though.
Indeed. Indeed. I'm starting to think of so now I'm going to wrap the zucchini in tinfoil and stick it on the grill or something, and see if I can toast it that way. I'm not sure, but that's fine. So meat, dairy, and eggs has come up. Tell me, what about eggs is less healthy than not eggs?
Well, and this will get into second order questions, because I'm going to say eggs are unhealthy or relatively unhealthy foods because they are high in dietary cholesterol, saturated fat. They contain no fiber, and they don't contain they generally don't contain vitamin C. So
all right, so as long as I was getting enough fiber and vitamin C, what would be the downside of adding some eggs into my diet?
Well, definitely the saturated fat and dietary cholesterol.
Cholesterol and fat. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can see that. All right. So I'm assuming that the saturated fat and things like that would also count for meat.
Yes.
And the no fiber. I think you could say meat doesn't have any fiber in it. Okay.
Yeah, unless you're talking about liver, perhaps maybe has vitamin C. I'm not sure, but most meat, dairy, and eggs would not contain vitamin C or fiber. Okay.
So how do you know this is true? What's your source?
Oh, you would ask me for sources, wouldn't you?
Well, I don't need you to cite me a source, type it up. I just mean who do you trust and why?
Well, I suppose if you wanted to look at nutritional information for any food you're eating, you could probably go on to a website
I know where that database is. Yeah, where I can see the nutrition facts. Yeah,
nutrition facts online, that kind of thing, and get data that way. I sometimes have occasionally used a nutritional calculator called Chronometer, where you type in the foods you've eaten for the day, and it gives you all the nutritional information of your meal for the or your diet for the day. So that's how I would kind of know things are true, to a certain level of certainty there.
Yeah. I had to some years ago shift entirely away from sugar in my diet.
Yeah.
And to minimize the carbohydrates in my diet. So I got real friendly with nutrition facts and how to look those things up quickly and understand. I had friends that were saying, yeah, I'm trying to eliminate all the sugar from my diet, so I'm using this fruit juice that's all no added sugar.
Yeah.
It's 95% calories from sugar already. You don't need to add any. That's just sugar.
Right. Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. And so is fruit juice too processed too much?
Yeah. It would be. I mean, that would be part of your 5% rather than your 95% if you're looking at it that.
Okay.
Which is
so you would just eat the fruit.
Yeah. The idea is you want to eat your calories, don't drink your calories. That's generally the guideline behind whole food plant-based.
Okay. Good. So I like my caffeine wrapped with carbonated water and flavorants with artificial sweeteners. Would that be in or out of your diet?
That's a good question. So I don't know. Like if it's one of those 0-calorie drinks. In other words, it's not loaded with sugar. Diet. Then I guess I would probably punt on that one to some extent at this point. I mean, my sense is water is the best beverage.
Okay?
Yeah.
That's almost entirely water, more than 95%.
Yeah, it is. Now, the fact that it has a lot of caffeine, there are, some people like to really kick the caffeine habit, although it's very difficult for some people. But yeah, I wouldn't really die on that hill of Diet Dr. Pepper, personally. Mm-hmm. I try to stick with water myself.
Yeah. I find I don't drink enough water unless I bribe myself by making it carbonated and flavorants.
Okay.
Yeah. So I make that trade.
Sure.
Okay. So your sources. So I heard one was like the Government Nutrition Facts database from which all those labels are made. Any others that lead you to think that this particular diet is the most healthy?
Oh yeah, because what I would just describe to you there is just kind of like getting the micronutrients and macronutrients of the foods you're eating. It doesn't necessarily tell you which macronutrients you ought to stay away from and which ones you ought to make sure you get enough of. Although I suppose that there is some of that information on those nutrition fact sites as well.
Yeah.
But the whole idea of, is saturated fat bad for you? It in some areas, in some circles, that's a controversial claim, but I think it's a pretty well attested fact in nutrition, which is that yes, I believe there's substantial evidence that a consumption of saturated fat elevates your serum cholesterol levels and your blood cholesterol levels, and that elevated blood cholesterol levels over time cause cardiovascular disease. And so that's where a lot of the geeky, scientific studies would have to be thrown up, presented, and to persuade a skeptic. Yeah,
sure. So I'm going to summarize and say that the scientific consensus is that elevated cholesterol levels cause heart disease, and the best way to address that is to minimize the intake of saturated fats.
That's right. Dietary cholesterol has an impact on elevating your serum cholesterol, but it's a lot weaker of a connection. Yeah.
My understanding of that is it's something like only 10% of our serum cholesterol comes from our diet. 90% comes from conversion from saturated fats and sloughing off of the interior lining of the small intestine and such like that.
Yeah, I don't know. But what I would say is, what I've heard is a lot of people will say, I tried reducing my cholesterol through dietary means, but I could only drop it by 10 points using diet. So I started taking statins. But the reason what I think is generally the case is somebody could only drop their serum cholesterol by 10 points because they switched from beef to chicken, or or beef to fish, but they, in other words, if they were really willing to go hardcore and go whole food plant based, get rid of all the meat, all the dairy, all the eggs, and and also stay away from high-fat plant-based foods like coconut and maybe too much guacamole or something. Then I think you could keep that.
I bet you think this is more processed than I should have.
Yeah, is that coconut oil?
Yeah, that's my main cooking oil.
Yeah. See, I'm a bearer of bad news in this podcast here.
Yeah, that's fine.
Is coconut oil could arguably be worse for your arteries than butter, because it is a higher proportion of its calories are from saturated fat than even butter.
Wow.
But yeah, so my favorite nutritionist says, has a blog post titled "Don't Go Cuckoo Over Coconut Oil," and he advocates as to why you should resist the media buzz about how coconut oil is good for you. Anyway.
Okay. Why do you trust this nutritionist specifically?
Well, because he seems to have a decades-long track record of helping, of working in the field of what we call clinical nutrition or lifestyle medicine, of trying to treat people's health problems with nutrition rather than surgeries and drugs. And also, he does seem to present a lot of scientific data, links to PubMed articles to back up what he's saying when you ask him to provide some backing for it. So he has convinced me that the scientific data backs up what he says. Now that's hard for a layman like me, because I'm not. In fact, nobody probably is familiar with all the scientific studies that are published in all the peer-reviewed journals. So it's very difficult to feel like you really have a grasp of everything. But as far as somebody,
if I've got an expert who's actually keeping themselves up to date with the process, and seems to only maybe have a few minority positions, from the consensus, I tend to trust that they know a lot more than I do, and I won't second guess them real hard myself. So that seems like a good feedback. Hypothetically, what could you learn tomorrow? This doesn't have to be something that's actually real. That would increase your confidence from 90 up to 95 or higher.
I think if you did if you could somehow get a randomized clinical trial, where you got 100 heart disease patients in one group, 100 in another, and let's say one of them was doing 100, the first 100 were doing whole food plant-based, and they actually were doing the diet, not just told to do it, but actually followed through and stuck to the diet for, say, 5 years. And another group was told to do, say, the Mediterranean diet. In other words, sort of similar to whole food plant-based, but more meat, more dairy, more eggs, and even several tablespoons of olive oil along with it. And if the outcome was that the whole food plant-based diet had better outcomes, they lived longer, didn't suffer as many heart attacks during that 5-year period, then that would increase my confidence. Yes. So
we started with heart patients, and did we convert them from whatever diet to this whole foods diet at the beginning, or are these people that we're selecting who already had this diet?
Oh, so are you saying that when people start the trial, do they already have heart disease? Yeah, I mean, that would be a good. I think that's there's lots of different tests I would like to have access to. But I do think testing people who are high risk is the quickest way to learn if there's any discrepancies. If you test people who are like in their 20s, you might have to wait 30 years before you start see the heart attacks start showing up to know if there's any statistically significant difference between the two diets.
So that sounds to me like this test would be maybe good at determining whether switching to that diet once you have heart disease could slow the rate of the disease or something like that, which certainly would be an indication that it might help prevent the thing up front, although that's not hardcore. Right. It does seem like it would take a longer study and a more neutral study that wasn't selecting for people who already have a condition before we could make the generalized statement to the rest of society. But it's certainly a good place to start. Certainly, it's the way to bet.
Well, and one set of studies, family of studies that really has led to, I think, what is called the scientific consensus on, blood cholesterol being a causal factor in probably the main causal factor in cardiovascular disease, is studying people with familial hypercholesterolemia, meaning that they're born with a birth defect.
Yeah.
That means they don't process cholesterol very effectively. And some people who have the strongest form end up having heart attacks when they're 10 years old, because their cholesterol levels are like 1,000 milligrams per deciliter. And so those are like extreme cases of elevated cholesterol from birth, and even maybe in utero, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
And they end up having heart attacks.
For context, a healthy range is between 1 and 200. What's the healthy range for cholesterol?
Well, that's what the American Heart Association says. They want it down below 200. It probably, lower is probably even better. If you can get it below 150, that's fine. But when you have these people who, even if they're eating somewhat healthy, if they end up having cholesterol levels of 800, 900, and they have heart attacks when they're very young, that kind of research led people to believe that, that's one of the streams of evidence that led people to conclude that elevated levels of cholesterol in your blood cause heart disease. And so this trial that I was talking about is kind of another type of way of sort of proving or trying to provide evidence for, because you bring the cholesterol levels down when the person already has heart disease, and you see if they stop having chest pain, you see if they can walk 10 steps and not have chest pain, so on, that kind of stuff.
Okay. Hypothetical the other direction. What could you learn tomorrow? Doesn't have to be a real thing.
Yeah. That
would lower your confidence from 90, maybe as far as 50.
I suppose it would probably be a randomized clinical trial. And it would have to be one where people actually did not just were instructed to do the whole food plant-based diet, but actually did. Compliance is important, obviously. And then there is maybe some other diet that was, maybe fairly standard American diet, and the results were equivalent. So there wasn't really any clinical benefit of the whole food plant-based diet. That would be pretty powerful, I would think.
Okay. Good. My feedback for you is, I like your sources. I like how you choose your sources. Your authorities fit my epistemology to a T. But what do I know? Okay, right. So I think that works out great. The way you interact with your hypotheticals definitely tells me you're not stuck on one position. Your needle is free to move based on further input in that data. So 2 thumbs up. Thank you very much for that claim.
Okay.
Let me see.
I get the feeling there's a but.
Is there a but? No, actually. No,
okay, good.
No, I'm just going to check the text and see if anybody has any comments real quick that okay, Dr. Anzai says the best food for me is food, definitely long-term vegetarian diet without animal proteins requires vitamin reposition, therefore not healthier. Okay, so some feedback from our local medical doctor that you need more vitamins.
And you need more vitamins than what you can get in your plant-based food?
FK says vitamin B.
B as in boy?
B as in boy is what I heard.
Well, I think, vitamin B12, it is important to point out that if you remove meat, dairy, and eggs from your diet, you probably should, in fact, you probably almost certainly should have a vitamin B12 supplement. Supplement. B12, you need that because you won't really get it in plant-based sources on a reliable basis, except for fortified foods like fortified cereals that are fortified with vitamin B12. So you do have to supplement vitamin B12 one way or another if you remove meat, dairy, and eggs from your diet.
So your whole foods diet, I'm not going to try to change your claim, but it seems like your whole food diet says and appropriate supplementation to cover the missing bits.
Yeah, and I think vitamin B12 is the I wouldn't say it's the only missing bit, because some people say maybe you should take a little bit of vitamin D, especially if you live in the northern, if you live up in Canada or whatever, you don't get much sun exposure.
I like my milk, so I'm getting my D.
Yeah, right. So you're not on the whole food plant-based diet anyway, but no, but
I'm so not. Yeah,
yeah. But I think it's a good question though, is whether or not, like, are there lots of vitamins, important vitamins besides vitamin B12 that you're going to be deficient in if you don't eat meat, dairy, and eggs? And I'm going to generally say no. The main concerns are protein, calcium, what else? Essential fatty acids, things like that. And those are interesting questions to dig into. If you just eat, if you decided to say, I'm just going to eat nothing but grapes, you probably are going to be deficient in protein. But if you
completely.
But if you eat a relatively wide variety of plant-based foods, and pay attention to the protein content. In other words, don't try to eat 2,000 calories of fruit, but try to try to eat.
I think you might be able to drop fruit completely, and not miss anything except the macronutrient carbohydrate.
Right, but I mean,
and by the way, when you said macronutrient, I was gonna throw it in, so I'll do it now. Macronutrients are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins.
Yeah,
and micronutrients are all the vitamins and all the other things that are not part of that master set.
Exactly.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, and then I have. Do some people actually have problems from having an only vegetarian diet? Who suffers from that, and why?
Well, and I have to admit, I should have probably said this from the beginning. I'm a nutritionist. So do some people have problems from an all vegetarian diet that get better when they eat meat? I don't personally know of any. I'm sure there's a lot of people who will say, hey, I tried and my health deteriorated.
Mm-hmm.
What I would wonder is, what kind of vegetarian diet were you on? Because there's this one doctor I follow, and he likes to joke that he goes to college campuses trying to tell people to eat a healthier vegetarian diet. And he'll run into college students who will say, I was on the beer and French fries diet last year, and my health
that's
went to
vegan.
pot. Yeah, that's vegan.
Yeah, so, no doubt.
So I would tend to think I would tend to think that somebody could tweak their vegetarian diet, keep it vegetarian, and make it healthy for them. But again, I'm not a physician, so I'm pretty confident of that. But there could be some rare exceptions.
I think we've caught up with the text parts of it. I'm assuming that alcohol is way too processed, right?
Yeah.
Alcohol might mess with things.
Well, yeah. I mean,
and I'd like to open it up to the room.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think alcohol is a kind of a category on its own, which is, it does hurt the liver. It can have it does have an impact on the brain, obviously, and so it's definitely not required. If I don't do alcohol because whenever I drink beer, I get flushed and my wife freaks out and thinks I'm having some sort of seizure. So I just
you can fake her out with niacin.
Yeah.
I'm not drunk.
Yeah. So I stay away from alcohol just because, it's easier that way. But yeah. So it's not a health food. I don't think alcohol is a health food. There is that debate about whether or not it reduces cardiovascular risk. A little bit of red wine every day. I think it's kind of inconclusive. I also think that alcohol consumption increases your risk of certain kinds of cancers. So, I would say moderation, or if you don't like alcohol, if you're like me, you don't really like the taste of alcohol, don't drink it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. Okay, so I'd like to open it up to the rest of the room to talk and hand it out with the last question. Is it possible to have too low cholesterol?
My answer to that would be, if you are achieving your low cholesterol through a healthy diet, you're not, in other words, you're not saying, I'm going to become a methamphetamine addict, so I stop eating, and then that'll tank my cholesterol. Well, no. But if you achieve that very low cholesterol level through a healthy diet, as I described it, I would say that you can't go too low.
Okay. I welcome the room to unmute themselves, and maybe production can help with. Good. So feel free to unmute and throw yourself in and talk. I'm going to drop my video so that we get the, let's see. If I have a lot of people, I can disconnect myself from the video. So I'm not leaving. I'm still here.
Okay.
It's
Hello.
for bandwidth reasons because I'm operating remotely.
I'm still my best. Oh, can you guys hear me? Oh,
Yes, we hear you. Yes, I
thought
hear you
because
just
I don't
fine.
have the headphones would be problematic. You guys let me know if I need the headphones. I'll take it.
Okay. Okay.
So
So far, I'm not hearing
sorry,
any
I
echo,
don't know.
so it sounds great.
I'm really bad with names.
Mark,
What's your name?
my name's Mark.
Mark. Hi, Mark. I'm Fanny. So, Mark, I wanted to ask you, or just try to do the same exercise you did with the egg, with the any other ingredients of diet that you have, because you actually use like, oh, egg is not a healthy food because only has protein and cholesterol, and it's like, wow, those are actually the two structural base, let's say, you know, things for humans to survive: proteins
Yeah.
that actually make our structures, and cholesterol that has no other form of animal protein than animal, and that the one specific that we actually need to make our own hormones that are animal hormones. So we need the same substrates from those hormones of animal protein, and that we cannot get into any vegetable. So yeah, that was my first thing, but not even defending egg, but using your same argument that the egg doesn't have vitamin C. And I was like, okay, let's get spinach. Spinach only has what? Fiber and some complex B, and then very low in comparison of what you meant about the B complex. That actually B complex is not just B12. The B12 is the only B vitamin that we actually produce in our intestines after we eat, you know, and it actually we can actually have deficiency on B12 if we drink alcohol. So I thought it was interesting that you link all that, and I thought was a little bit related to what the Rio said in the conversation yesterday. As less you know, more you think. Because I see you saying, I think you mean this think as a guess. So I think you're guessing a lot of things on the human biology and diet. And could be because you're just following dietitians that are not doctors. I guess.
Well, I mean, I admit I have read a lot of books written by doctors, and I've also been part of a discussion forum that's hosted by a physician and also moderated by a registered dietitian. So I mean, I have had access to, you might call them the experts, but the problem comes is you can find a cardiologist who will tell you that
sorry. I just wanted to do what I was asking you, is to do the same exercise with the egg argument on the spinach or any other food. It's like, okay, so now you take the lime. The lime has the vitamin C that the egg doesn't have, but the lime has no fiber. So is that a honest argument to use against egg, for example?
Well, yeah, and this, I mean,
epistemologically speaking.
Yeah, I guess what we're dealing with here is like, dietary patterns matter more than individual foods, right?
But we all understand that the diet is made of all these ingredients. So when you isolated the egg and saying egg is bad because of that, I could just throw any other food and say that this food is also bad. The spinach, the lettuce, the lime. I just thought was a weak argument to speak against egg. And I wanted to say that defending egg now, even a high cholesterol patient can eat two eggs a day every day without having a higher cholesterol after a while. We have done these medical studies already. Okay, so just saying that is a lie. Because high cholesterol people that could be watching this would completely destroy the egg, and the egg has its value, mainly because we have this culture of banning cholesterol of our diet. And what we are experiencing nowadays is a lot of young people with low cholesterol, low testosterone, claiming that that there are other reasons than their diet. And we actually have impotent people, mostly men, because women usually have low libido. But now we have an entire generation of low libido guys because they have like no testosterone. Because how we make testosterone out of grass? Oh, sorry, lettuce.
Well, yeah, I mean,
You know?
and I think it's true that if someone was going to try to subsist on romaine lettuce, I mean, I think romaine lettuce is a
No,
healthy
I
food.
mean in all fruits, you can eat all the range of fruits and vegetables, and you're not gonna have cholesterol. You're not gonna have protein, animal protein to produce your hormones, and you're gonna have disturbance, deficiency on all the B complex that is not B12 only. Okay, we have B1, 2, 3, 5, 12,
Yeah.
and others with different applicabilities in our body on structure, mainly talking about protein. And I think the most important is like if adults want to get sick and eat just fruits and vegetables and reposition, or I don't know how to say that, retake their other insufficiency through pills, B complex pills, and eat protein bars and other things, I'm fine with that. But this
Right.
type of diet that many adults are applying to their children that are into growing process, it needs all the range of proteins to all the vitamins and small nutrients. It is dangerous what you're doing. We're doing like it's a cult of banning foods when diet, it's all healthy for humans being natural. If it's like the most natural element of the food, and we would restrict the restrictions
Uh-huh.
to intolerance. That would be like probably the healthier way, I would say.
Yeah, and I would disagree with you, but
Mhm.
but I guess how much time do I have to explain why I disagree? I guess
22 minutes.
20. I mean, okay, because like for example, the protein issue, like because that is something that someone who goes on a whole food plant-based diet will be asked is, are you getting enough protein? Are you getting all the essential amino acids?
So
that
my
you need?
question is like this: what is healthier and practical or easier to most of people follow? Eat everything in a good variety, as we always told them, and save the restrictions for the intolerance, or have to eat just vegetables and fruits and start measuring our deficiencies to try to take pills to retake those. Is that
Well,
that was the dichotomy? It's like eat normally or eat under diet.
well, I mean,
It's
I
not
guess
even which diet.
right, but I guess what I'm wondering though is like if we're concerned about a nutritional deficiency of some kind, let's say we're
I'm you concerned of high cholesterol, and I'm concerned with the low deficiency that measures like publicly or wide range measures or tell everybody to just stop eating meat.
Mhm.
It's gonna cause other problems. It could be a slippery slope, yeah, but it's something that I don't think we are in the process of doing. I think a lot of people already believe the vegetarian diet is better. They have problems. They feel weak. They feel,
Yep.
it's not a proper anemia. But the people that have those diets, they're always weak. They're always like have less libido, less disposition, well-being that is included in this thing on the health. It is being affected by this diet, and by historically speaking, there were entire civilizations survived out of only animal fat and protein, like the Inuit Eskimos
Mhm.
in northern areas where we cannot actually grow plants and vegetables, but we don't have an entire generation, civilization, or population that has survived only on fruits and vegetables. So that is actually a better argument to just like say that, oh, I think because our modernity and the easy life that we can have today and pretty much get all these alternative foods, this is for me is not healthier, because listening to other nutritionists on doctor side, they
Mhm.
always say no, the best way would be we eat less processed and not more.
Well,
Okay,
right.
so yes, it
Okay.
goes back to the vegetarian, but also goes back to like animal and not the processing, not the bars, the protein bars and the pills that the people that actually enter those diets have to go through. So in the end, in our actual moment, like time and space, it's healthier to have a more natural food that would not be take pills or eat protein bars.
Thank you, Fanny.
Even
That
in
was
their own
it's really
argument.
good to have you bring the other position. Very much not SE. I bet, Mark, you could tell the difference between those two reviews.
Well, yeah, sure. And it'd be interesting to actually have, try to have like a debate, an actual debate. Because I realize
Fanny, I'm not debate shaming you. Thank you for that.
Because I realized juggling what you were doing is kind of just you're doing SE. But if I was to try to participate in a debate over the whole food plant-based diet versus either some other diet or just any alternative, I would have to bring to bear the various scientific studies that I think support. I mean, those scientific studies that did most of the work in persuading me to adopt this diet 10 years ago, because 10 years ago I was in my mid 40s and I was enjoying ice cream, I was enjoying filet mignon, coconut shrimp and so on, and I didn't stop enjoying those foods. That's not why I gave up those foods. I gave up those foods because I came upon some information and was persuaded by the information to change my diet. And I guess I'm pretty unusual because I think most people most people aren't, no matter what they read, they don't want to give up their favorite foods. And I totally understand that.
I don't think you're abnormal. I think you're very normal. You are in the age range where people start doing those things.
Right.
Because the cholesterol comes, the age comes. We care about our living longer now more than before. Sure. I think that is a completely natural process. I see my mother-in-law and father-in-law and people consuming this coconut oil and trying to replace foods. That is completely natural. But we also need to be a little bit skeptic about scientific studies that talk about food and try to bring tendencies. Because now we actually talking about, again, every time we come back to the previous studies, to the pseudo-scientific studies about the controversy on the egg and cholesterol, why they change every 2-3 years. They say eat egg, don't eat egg. John Oliver has a funny show that he actually, probably 3-4 years ago, I don't watch John Oliver anymore. I left the left. But John Oliver has a funny show that he made about one study that was a study talking about preeclampsia and chocolate, that the chocolate consumption during pregnancy, even for patients with high blood pressure, would not cause preeclampsia in the pregnancy. And that was a real study. He was making a joke because there was some news took this study and completely distorted the idea and started saying chocolate in the pregnancy protects from hypertension. And every pregnancy started eating chocolate and buying chocolate because
I agree. I agree.
I'm just like jumping on another example that's not the same, but I'm just saying like we should be skeptic and you should go through. And sometimes even if they make sense with their methodology,
right? Yeah,
we should is that a universe big enough for me, or understand like how many pharmaceutical companies are making studies to say that their medicine is better than the other, has better, this is also what happens in the food industry. So I would be a little skeptical. Yeah, no problem.
But I think, I think you're right. I mean, we have to be skeptical because there are just thousands and thousands and thousands of scientific studies out there testing, all kinds of different tests that have some applicability to nutrition, and they contradict each other. And sometimes the sample sizes are small. Sometimes the study design is not very good, and so people get this idea like, well, why is coffee good for you on Mondays and Tuesdays, but not on Wednesdays and Thursdays? Why is it every time I pick up my newspaper, I'm getting a different recommendation to eat some different superfood? And so I do think that that anybody, I mean, in my own case, I decided to dig into some of this information, which I could probably spend several lifetimes really doing and not become acquainted as I'd like to be. But
it's not really up to the layperson to get that experienced about it. We should be able to get these answers to a high enough credibility to make good decisions without having to become experts in everything ourselves. Yeah.
But ultimately, it's like, in fact, I asked this of this nutritionist guy that I correspond with, and I said, hey, what do you do when you get all these conflicting ideas? You get one set of doctors that say eat this way, you get another set of doctors that say eat this way, and so on. And he said to me, well, how is that any different than any other area of your life? When you want to get your car repaired, don't you worry that the auto shop guy is ripping you off and maybe not telling you the full scoop, or just doesn't, or gives you different advice than the other guy? And that's true that in a lot of areas of our life, even when it comes to the news we get on, whether we watch CNN or Fox News or whatever, we don't know if we're getting the whole scoop. And so I think
that's what peer-reviewed science is for.
Right. And then
when we really give a crap, we really care about it. We make them fight against each other and work it out in rooms, all patiently and kindly.
Yeah.
I want to ask a meta question. You just had two very different reviews. One where I heard you out and we examined your epistemology and your reasons, and one where Fanny brought a lot of countering information and reviewed your stuff in detail. Did either one of them have any influence on your confidence?
No, not really. I mean, Fanny, the arguments that Fanny has brought up, I've heard them before, and like the Inuit. What really got me interested was when she was talking about the Inuit, the Eskimos, who because they don't have a lot of access to plant foods, they eat a lot of whale blubber and whatnot, and so on. And that was something I was really interested in when I was first starting this. I thought, well, I want to look into that because, that would seem to go against the whole idea that we need to eat more fruits and vegetables. If those guys were eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, so I would say the reason why I wasn't persuaded is I think I'm into this 10 years and I've had plenty of time to kind of, if I've had any doubts, I've had a chance to kind of dig in and kind of look into it. Although I'm not a healthcare professional, don't take your advice directly from me, But there are a series of studies that I would love to be able to share with people if I wouldn't put them to sleep in the process, describing certain scientific studies that I think are kind of interesting and help persuade me that I'm on the right track. But anyway, do
you know that you haven't cherry picked your studies?
That's an excellent question. I don't think I really know for sure that I haven't cherry picked my studies because there's so many of them to pick from.
Yeah, good. Okay. Does anybody else from the audience like? I'm not saying not Fanny. I'm saying, does anybody from the audience want to have some more time before we close out today?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, please.
So I've noticed that there is this sort of pushback against fat lately, where like you have things that are labeled heart healthy, and they're like trying to say that fat's bad for you. You need to reduce the amount of fat in your diet, and you see that little American Heart Association sticker. And I'm thinking that what they're doing is they're removing the fat calories and replacing them with sugar calories. And I would say that perhaps fat, even saturated fat, would be good for you insofar as it might prevent you from eating more sugar and may satiate your hunger and stabilize your blood sugar.
Okay, so if I replace fat calories with sugar calories, that could be worse than the fat calories, especially if my fat calories are already not out of proportion, maybe something like that.
And like my idea is that like we get our calories from fat, protein, and carbohydrates, and so calling fat bad is true and all because it contains calories, but wouldn't I rather get my calories from fat than sugar or protein?
Yeah, and I think Mark was specifically on saturated fat. I don't mean to step on you. Go ahead.
Sure.
So maybe there would be a substitution for unsaturated fat that would fit into this question somewhere. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah. I mean, in the early heart studies back in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, a lot of time when they would do diet trials, sometimes what they would do is just substitute foods that were heavy in saturated fat with foods that were heavy in polyunsaturated fat or monounsaturated fat, which isn't really what the whole food plant-based diet is, because the whole food plant-based diet is actually very low in fat overall. It's low in total fat and low in saturated fat. But I do think that if you give somebody a choice, if you give somebody a choice between sugar and fat, that's, I'm not sure which one is healthier. I think it might be better to reduce your refined sugar intake and back off on the fat intake, and that gets to something like sweet potatoes, which are carbohydrate, but when you eat a sweet potato, you're not just eating sugar out of the sugar bowl with a spoon. You're getting fiber, you're getting a whole bunch of vitamins, and the reason why I mentioned fiber so many times is that I've seen scientific studies that show that about 95% of the American population does not get the recommended amount of fiber in their diet. And so reason why fiber is, reason why, you might say, well, you can get fiber from other sources, so why worry about that when it comes to eggs or meat or dairy? But in order to get the recommended amount of fiber in your diet, you really have to, maybe I'm not answering your question. I'm answering a question you didn't ask. But anyway, focus. It's important to get enough fiber in your diet.
That's in your contract.
Yeah. Okay. But anyway, but as far as that, I think it's a terrible choice to ask somebody to choose between sugar and fat. I mean, it's like, do you drink the olive oil? Do you guzzle the olive oil, or you eat the white sugar out of a bag? Obviously, both are bad choices, So, but as far as the American Heart Association is concerned, and a lot of the foods, the way they're advertised, that's the problem Americans have is most of the information we get is marketing. Most of the nutritional information we get is marketing, and it's hard. It gets very confusing. Who's telling the truth? When I see that box that says heart healthy, does that mean I should go ahead and eat it? And I'd say, I don't know if you should eat it just because it says that on the box. Sorry.
Okay, Gina.
Mm-hmm. Hey, well, first of all, I wanted to return to the question of the reliability of your sources.
Yeah.
We were talking about there are scientific studies about the dangers of the sugar and the fat and the cholesterol in the food, but how do you know those sources are reliable? I mean, there are other sources that could be saying the exact opposite thing.
Yeah.
And still more who could have a vested interest in just selling you something that they making a lot of money off of. What methods do you use for discerning the difference?
Yeah, that's I think that's a very tough question, actually, because when you go on PubMed, and do a search on studies on saturated fat and heart disease, I mean, you can find studies that say, hey, consuming more saturated fat, doesn't increase your risk of heart disease. You can find those studies. The question you've got to ask, I mean, it's almost like one of these, did Jesus rise from the dead type question? It's like, can you trust this source? Can you trust this biblical scholar versus this other biblical scholar? Neither one of them were there when Jesus got buried, right? But and so I think it's the epistemological problem we're faced with, regardless of what diet we choose. But here's what persuaded me, which is that yes, if you take people who are relatively low risk, like in their 20s, and you're taking Americans who are generally eating meat, dairy, and eggs. There's very few there's a small proportion of vegetarians and vegans in the United States, but most people are eating, meat, dairy, and eggs almost every meal of the day, or at least every day. And you study them. There's a lot of, it's hard to really, it's like comparing, it gets to the point where you're comparing the risk of lung cancer amongst people who are smoking 5 cigarettes a day versus 10 cigarettes a day. And if you don't see a statistically significant difference in the incidence of lung cancer amongst, the super heavy smokers versus the moderately heavy smokers, then, do you say, well, hey, smoking doesn't really cause lung cancer? Here's so that's the dilemma we face, because we're studying real human beings, and we're having this. We have to study them over decades sometimes in order to really get the data we want. Unless you want to study people who've already reached a stage where they've been diagnosed with cardiovascular disease or whatever. I mean, that's one area where studying diets becomes a little bit less expensive, because now people are closer to death or closer to a second heart attack. And if you radically change, their diets one way or the other, you get quicker results in studies like that. So I agree with you that if you want to be skeptical about my sources, I totally understand, because I haven't even told you what the sources really are. I haven't really had a chance to go look up this, article about.
That would be a different day, as we have about 3 minutes. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Me being skeptical about your sources isn't as important as you being skeptical about them. I have no opinion one way or the other.
It's not about whether I'm convinced or she's convinced or anything else. This is you reviewing your own thing. Redding, take the next 2-3 minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's the idea that a lot of the evidence is marketing. Though there is some truth to that. I think that's just more along the lines of marketers getting a hold of half-baked studies and using it to their advantage. Like the whole idea of fat versus carbs is pretty much, in my opinion, a misnomer, because the problem, like the rise of type 2 diabetes and the rise of obesity, it's just too much of everything. It's the whole idea that sugar causes diabetes is just not true. It's from the research that I have glimpsed at and the experts I have talked to. Another problem, I think one of the biggest problems, is a lot of the researchers, their methodology sometimes is flawed. Like there's one study that proponents of fat constantly point to when they argue the recommended levels of saturated fat, which is 10% of your daily caloric intake, is that the study compared to 2 diets, and one that was higher than the other, and concluded that there was no difference between the two when it comes to saturated fat intake. The problem with that study and the reason why it shouldn't be used as a way to say, look, saturated fat doesn't matter, is that both diets they used to compare were super low in saturated fat, well below what your average North American eats in a day. So I believe it was just so, both of them were just so little when compared. Like the average American diet is 4 or 5 times the amount of either of the comparisons. So trying to use that, if it's been done, I haven't seen it, of like a test of a low saturated intake compared to the typical saturated intake of the day and what it has. But from all the research that I have done, it's pointed towards that, too much saturated fat is correlational to obesity, or to heart risk, heart disease, and other aspects of it. And the whole, they're removing fat to replace carbs, but they're replacing it with sugar. It's just a calorie is a calorie, no matter where it comes from. And if you have too many calories, that's where the problem lies. Yeah,
I think you're right. In terms of the calorie being a calorie, I think that's basically right. And then also, the fat versus carbs issue. I mean, what I would say is there are good carbs and bad carbs. I mean, I think the Dr. Pepper, the regular Dr. Pepper. I won't criticize Juggling's Diet Dr. Pepper right now, but the regular Dr. Pepper, that's carbohydrate, but so is a sweet potato or brown rice. So what I would tell people is don't be afraid of carbs, but pick the healthy carbs. So that's what I would say on that. Yeah.
Thank you. It's about an hour, so I'm going to bring it to a close. I want to paraphrase one other comment from 3XK. The more you read studies, the more you will learn the methodology of the studies. And to that degree, it will become less and less tough to choose between the right ones. So reading them is the best way to learn how to make the job less tough.
Good advice.
All right. Thank you all for coming. Let's see. Here are 5 of my favorite YouTube channels that are SE specific, SE centric, and that I would like to promote. There's a little more on this list. If you go to my channel, you'll see featured channels over on the side. If you're really into this method of street epistemology, there are gobs of great resources on the site streetepistemology.com, brought to you by Street Epistemology International. Thank you to my guests and audience and all of you. I couldn't do this without you. I wouldn't do this without you. If you would like to be a guest on my show for this or any of the other 7 categories of things that I have on the topic of SE, I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.